Our next speaker is from University of California, Davis, Dr. Isaiah Kisekka. And Dr. Kisekka is going to tell us about water use and sustainable agriculture practices. Dr. Kisekka.
Thanks, Jim and Jason, for inviting me. This is not a typical convention where I speak. I typically speak at professional society meetings. So if my presentation is a little too academic, excuse me. This is a phone.
The green one is too fast.
Okay. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'm going to talk about water technologies in agriculture. I've categorized them into hardware technologies and software technologies. And I'll make a few remarks on climate-smart water management practices and a few closing remarks. Okay? But before I get into water technologies, I like to put up this map that shows the global food inflation. When you talk about agriculture, especially in developed societies, a lot of people don't relate to agriculture. But when you talk about food inflation, they understand it because when they go to a grocery store and they spend a big part of their paycheck to buy food, then they understand how important agriculture is. So this map shows that even in the US, we have been suffering from food inflation of 2 to 5%. And many developing countries are actually having even higher inflation, food inflation. There are many factors that go into food inflation, but one of the main ones is production that is impacted by climate extremes or global events like the Ukrainian war, for example. And irrigated agriculture can help mitigate the impacts of climate extremes like droughts or floods. This is a graphic from the USDA Economic Research Service that shows the importance of agriculture. The dark shades show the percentage of agriculture that is irrigated. It's less than 20%, but it contributes more than 50% to agricultural production. If you think about it, the 80% that is not irrigated is only contributing the other 50%. So if we cannot manage irrigated agriculture very well, we have a problem with our food supply. And this is a map of the United States. It has two shades, red and blue. A red shade indicates that that region of the US has lost 1,000 acres of irrigated agriculture, and the blue shows regions that have gained irrigated agriculture. You can see in the west, especially in the Central Valley, we've lost a lot of irrigated agriculture, as well as the US High Plains underlined by the Ogallala Aquifer. If you look at the map of Hawaii, Hawaii has lost a lot of irrigated agriculture as well. And this could be for many reasons, maybe land use change and other factors. So how can water tech help? These problems can be tackled in various ways through policies, but I believe that innovation, and specifically in the area of water technologies, can have an impact. And one of those technologies that a lot of people are familiar with is drip irrigation. Drip irrigation turned Israel has already been given as an example from a water deficit nation to a water surplus nation. Of course, there are other factors like water supply augmentation, but drip irrigation allows you to put water at the right place where you need it. But this is an example of an almond orchard of a farmer I work with in California. And when you're in this orchard, all the trees are different. When you put a drip line along a row of almonds, those almonds don't need the same amount of water or fertilizers at the same time. So we need a drip line that can put on different amounts of water along the road. That does not exist. A lot of people are working on this problem, but eventually that's where we want to be. But in the interim, how do you manage spatial variability? This map shows how variable land is, or agriculture field is. And this is typically used to map soil variability. It's called soil bulk electrical conductivity that basically tells you how the soil holds water in different places. You can see that it's very variable. And if you look at the satellite image in this southeast corner, you see that the satellite image where the trees are darker, you have light soils. Where the trees are lighter, you tend to have heavy clay soils. So how would you manage a problem like this? And if you have limited water, you have to use that water right. Okay? So what this farmer did was to break his farm. This is about 1,000 acres, 500 acres of almonds and 500 acres of walnuts, into smaller chunks to try and manage that variability. If you look at these soils, they vary from the red ones, which is a light soil, to a blue one, which is a heavy soil. They hold water in different ways. And so if you farm them the same way, you'll be losing water and nutrients. They'll be just going down below the root zone. And you'll not be as productive. So what we went in to do, we went in and used this technique, which has been used in the oil and gas industry for many years, called electrical resistivity tomography, that allows us to look at the subsurface. You inject electricity in the soil. If the resistance is high, the soil is dry. If the resistance is low, the soil is wet. So what we found in a clay soil, after about 5 hours, water only barely moved below ½ a meter. And the roots, where it's pink, it means that roots are pulling water faster than it's getting there from irrigation. The blue means the irrigation is getting into the soil. You can see here in this clay soil, the trees were pulling the water faster than it would get there. If you go to a sandy soil, on the other hand, the water was getting to the root zone faster than the trees would take it. What does this all mean? This means that these trees are going to produce more, they're going to be less stressed with limited amount of water. Okay? And you can see that expressed here. We compared how the trees were responding in terms of tree stress as well as soil water. You can see in the heavy soils, the green bar, which shows stem water potential measure of stress, is higher than the other soil types. What about soil moisture sensors? Soil moisture sensors, there's almost a new soil moisture sensor coming on the market every day. And why are there so many? Because nobody has actually figured out how to make a sensor that actually measures soil moisture. They all measure something else that you correlate to soil moisture. And so in that process, we call it calibration. And that's where you create a lot of uncertainty. If you put 5 soil moisture sensors even in the same block, you're giving the same amount of water, you're going to have different readings, and that makes it harder to interpret. By the way, all these technologies at the federal and the state level, they are subsidized through programs like NRCS's EQIP, or in California, we have one called the Statewide Water and Energy Efficiency Program that subsidizes them. But farmers actually, they get the money, buy them, and eventually just put them in their sheds. And what the ag tech companies have figured out that, okay, we will not sell you sensors, we'll sell you a service. Okay, you pay a subscription, and we own the hardware. But I think it's important to realize that these sensors are not completely useless. They're very useful, but to understand what they tell you, qualitatively, they'll tell you the soil is wetting or drying. Okay? And it can be a useful tool to manage water. In research, I think we have sensors that could be very useful, but they are too expensive, and they're not yet ready for operation. There's a company, I think it's based in Boston, it reached out to me and it says, we have been using cosmic ray sensors for homeland security and the Navy. We want to see if we can use them in agriculture. And I said, yes, but how can we interpret the data that we get? And this is an example of those cosmic ray neutron sensors. They are not point measurements. They use rays that come from the cosmos. They come into our atmosphere, find aerosols. They interact with them, create a cloud of neutrons that reach the Earth's surface. And when they interact with the hydrogen in the water, they get slowed down. Okay? So that's the idea we use to estimate them, to measure soil moisture. And instead of getting a point measurement, you're getting a wide area, a circle of about 100 meters. This is in a a pistachio orchard quite near to Davis. And, this is just a cartoon drawing where you see a lot of neutrons. That tells you the soil is dry because you don't have this hydrogen in the soil interacting with these rays. And where you have low neutrons, you get wet soil. And we have compared it to a classical neutron probe, and we found them very accurate. I think there's opportunity here for startup companies to take these tools that are in research to make them cheaper and operational. And this is basically how big of a circle that it measures. Another very useful soil moisture technology, by the way, this is the only soil moisture technology that is actually measuring soil moisture. It's very similar to the MRI that you get when you go to the hospital, but in soil moisture, we call it a nuclear magnetic resonance. It's basically measuring the hydrogen in the water, in the soil pores directly. The only problem is this instrument is $90,000 and no farmer is going to buy it. But a clever person could take the theory behind this technique and make a sensor that is more scalable. Okay? So I want to briefly talk about plant sensing, because when you're managing water in agriculture, you have to look at the soil, you have to look at the plant to tell you how it's responding to the way you're managing water, and you have to look at the atmosphere or the weather. And there are many ways to measure how plants respond to water stress, but one of the new ones is this technology called stem water potential sensors. Basically, these are microchips that you embed into the tree stem. Okay? They are barely 3 to 5 years old commercially. And they were basically in response to a scientific technique we used for decades, but no farmer was adopting it because it was labor intensive. You had to go to the field at solar noon, you have to cut a leaf and put it in a pressure chamber. Nobody was willing to do that. But this technique, one of them uses osmotics. It has a chamber that has a salt solution and a semi-permeable membrane, so when you embed it in a plant, water can cross that semi-permeable membrane. If the plant is dry, water crosses the other way into the salt chamber. If the plant is wet, the water enters the plant chamber. If it's dry, water moves from the salt chamber into the plant. And it creates a change in voltage that is related to water stress. And the top one, which is a microtensiometer, works very similar to a soil tensiometer, but it works based off microfluidics that allows it to really measure very high stress levels. And we have compared these in actual field conditions. And down there is one of my students using the traditional old technique with what we call a pressure bomb. And you can see that the scientific benchmark, which is the black dots, and the blue curves, which are the new sensors, actually give comparable data. Okay? Farmers now can sit on their computers or their phones and watch how their plants are responding to the way they are managing water. If you look at that red box that I put up there, when the graph is going down, it tells you that the plant is thirsty. It needs water. So the black bar is you put water on, and then the blue curve goes up again. It tells you the plant is happy, and then the cycle goes on. So you got a feedback on how tools like this is what allows you to deal with limited amount of water. Unfortunately, when you have limited water resources, say in drought, agriculture is at the bottom of the priority. Usually you prioritize people, the environment. In California, we even have seawater intrusion and then agriculture at the bottom. So we have to figure out how to work with limited water resources. But the technology that really excites me is this technology, which is an LAI evapotranspiration sensor. Evapotranspiration is just the water vapor that we don't see with our eyes, but it's moving from the vegetation to the atmosphere. It's one of the largest parts of the water cycle. But because we don't see it, we see water in rivers and lakes. And the water we don't see, like evapotranspiration of groundwater, is really usually not appreciated as much. But even 3 years ago, this technique costed $50,000. and it needed somebody with scientific expertise like me to get the raw data into a water use number. Now it's $5,000 and the farmer can use it himself. Okay? And it's still using the same science. Okay? So thank God for semiconductors and very high computational efficiencies that we have these days. There are other companies that, like Thule, that are also measuring evapotranspiration, but they are not directly measuring water vapor like the LAI 710. They're measuring fluctuations in temperature, because if you think about it, parcels of air come to the vegetation, they get temperature or heated up, raise up, and if you can measure that cooling and heating at very high frequencies, about 20 times a second, then you can estimate water use. We have actually compared this because I was skeptical that this private company could figure out how to do this. So I compared it in the pistachio orchard, and I was actually quite impressed that these sensors agreed very well. Okay? The traditional one, a covariance system that costs me $50,000 to set up, and this little cheap thing here that the farmer can now use, they were almost on a one-to-one line. The other technology is automation. Okay? Automation can really help with water management in agriculture because it helps you improve your operational efficiency. Okay? It can help you open and close valves so you're not putting on more water, you're not putting on less water. It can help you reduce on your greenhouse footprint. For example, in California, we have farmers farming 5,000 acres, and you have people on trucks driving to open and close valves. That's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. But with automation like this, you really can gain those efficiencies. The problem, however, is farmers have been very slow to adopt automation, because in many instances it has proved unreliable because of a lot of them are based on this cloud-based technology, and we don't have reliable internet everywhere, especially in many farming communities. So that's where the federal initiative on rural broadband, I think, would be welcome. There are many companies that do this. Another one is, this was actually started by farmers that wanted automation, but they couldn't find something that works for them. This is just a computer that you put in a box in the field, but it will do at least 80% of what the fancy automation systems from Wisconsin can do. It can open and close valves, it can start your pump, stop it, inject fertilizers, and all you need is a computer in the field. And they figured out that even where you don't have internet, you now have Elon Musk's Starlink, so you can link to almost anywhere. Okay? And this technology, automation, is not only for high-value crops. You can do it for low-value crops, for canals, for example, or alfalfa fields. The other technology that I think can make a very big difference is desalination of brackish groundwater. Especially in dry climates, we have brackish groundwater. Brackish groundwater is basically groundwater that ranges between 1,000 to 10,000 parts per million of total dissolved solids. You can't use it in its natural state, but you can, with minimum cost, desalinate it to a level that is usable. This is not seawater salinity levels. This is brackish water. And it's not like the way they are doing it in Israel, where they do desalination water. They have a central desalination system that transports water in the whole country. But Israel is a very small country. You can actually fit 3 Israelis in the Central Valley alone. So you have to think about a solution that is suitable for your local region. So people are talking about decentralized desalination system, where you have the desalination technology in a container. Okay? All your reverse osmosis system in the container, and the conversation has been, how do you deal with all the brine that you remove as part of your desalination process? And now I have colleagues that are working on things like nutrient recovery from this brine, and also this idea of a circular bioeconomic system. You can actually turn that brine into economically important products. Then you come to software technologies or water technologies that are not hardware, but they are software. And everybody's talking about AI and machine learning. There are many applications of AI and machine learning in water management. We have been playing with deep neural networks or random forests, and these are basically black boxes. If you can train them with sufficient data with inputs, they're very good at mapping input to output, okay? The challenge is always to have sufficient data, okay? Because in a year, you're going to have one season, okay? So the way we have gone around that is to use what is called synthetic data, okay? You grow crops in a computer and then use it to train these neural networks or random forest model. Then what about computational models or processed or physics-based models? I think the opportunity is here to go from complex tools that nobody uses to usable decision support tools. I developed this tool many years ago when I worked as a professor at Kansas State University working on water issues in the Ogallala region. I thought a private company would come and take this up and use it as a business, because this is just a web front end behind which we run a very complex model called DSET. But I haven't seen any startup come. Partly it's my fault because I haven't talked about it. It's all in a publication. And then there's remote sensing. Remote sensing is improving on a daily basis. We are getting more sensors in orbit. The algorithms are coming up every day. This is a map of Madera County. It's one of the groundwater basins in California, where they are managing how much water each farmer pumps, because not every farmer has a flow meter, so they are using remote sensing to monitor water allocation. And when you exceed your allocation, it costs money. Okay? But of course, there are issues with accuracy, and those need to be addressed. This is really interesting. There's a startup called Hydrostat, which is promising to provide thermal data. Thermal data is one of the major inputs from satellites that we use in estimating water use on a daily basis at a 50 meter pixel. To just put it in perspective, thermal data we use mostly comes from a US satellite called Landsat at a resolution of 100 meters by 100 meters, and you can get it every 8 or 16 days. So if we can get it daily for the whole globe at 50 by 50 meters, I think these are really major breakthroughs. And of course, you can go from satellites to airplanes or aerial platforms, and there are famous companies like Ceres that give you very high resolution images of your field. And you can use information like this to prioritize where you put your water if you have limited water. Okay? And then there are, of course, things like drones, and drones have one of their biggest benefits is the high resolution. Okay? And then there are other things that are more policy-oriented, like water markets. Okay? In California, for example, they are talking about farmers farming groundwater, where during a flood, if you can document that you infiltrated or you are banked, say, 1 acre foot, that is money you can get in a drought if somebody pumped out that 1 acre foot, okay? Or if you're growing alfalfa, you can sell that water in a dry year to somebody growing, say, almonds or strawberries, okay? But of course, these are not silver bullets. There are negative consequences to all these things, okay? Like pushing out small farmers. And then there's a big issue of soil health. Soil is the best. If we take care of it, we'll have agricultural systems that are resilient to climate change. We have found that these cover crops, they can actually help the soil infiltrate more water than if you have bare soil. We were lucky to find a farmer that actually planted these cover crops and maintained a similar field right next to each other without cover crops, and were measuring both carbon and water, and to see how these cover crops were actually impacting those cycles. To summarize this slide, when you have cover crops, you're going to use more water, okay? The cover crop orchard is the green, the one without cover crop is the yellow, meaning there's a cost to growing cover crops. But on the flip side, cover crops were fixing more carbon, okay? We are capturing more carbon in the atmosphere and fixing that carbon in the soil, which helps our soil to hold more water, okay? And of course, groundwater recharge. This is not a solution for everywhere, but with climate change, you swing between flooding and dry periods. If we can capture some of this excess water, store it and use it during dry periods, I think we'll have more resilient water systems. I think I'm running out of time, but to summarize here, sustainable management of our water resources will help us mitigate risk to our future food supplies. And we need to implement policies and incentives that promote adoption of proven water technologies. I work with a lot of startup companies that come to me with technologies I really feel are not ready for the market, but they're really under this pressure to come to market, and they end up creating a bad taste among their potential customers. We need to increase public and private sector investment in water technologies, and we need to expand policies that promote climate-smart agriculture. Okay, thank you.